Hey everybody, it's Ricardo Gorski, the founder of Tax.One, where we help individuals and businesses pay as little tax as legally possible. And in this video, I'm going to talk about my 2 best legal tax hacks for everyone that owns a company and specifically for the ones that have a Cypriot limited company. So let's get started right away. And I prepared 2 very big topics, but we will start with the first topic, and that is write-offs. As you guys know, we have a Cypriot company or a company in general, and our company is liable for corporate tax on our profits. And that actually also means that the less profits we have, the less taxes we will pay at the end of the tax calendar year. And with that in mind, if we can basically reduce our profits by having more expenses, then we will pay less taxes at the end of the tax calendar year. And here I noted down my best write-offs that every business owner, especially every person that lives in Cyprus, can have. And number 1 is actually a home office. And this is basically possible with a personal invoice to your company. So for me, for example, me as Ricardo Gorski, every month I have an automated invoice that Ricardo Gorski is issuing to my company, Hope & Go Limited. And here I have basically 30% of my monthly rent that I'm issuing as an invoice, as a rental invoice to my company. And that is possible because here in Cyprus, the landlords, they are renting you the property on your personal name because it's not a commercial property, most of the apartments and houses and villas that you are renting. So what we are doing at Tax.One with our clients, we say that for every 1,000 euros, you can basically safely claim 300 euros as an office expense claim. Just saying, hey, I have this room right here where I'm recording my videos. This is the only purpose of this room in my apartment here in Paphos. And this means that here, this area is solely business area and a little bit of my living room as well. So about 30%. But, big but, you need to be careful about your personal income tax. And here it becomes very individual because for me, myself, I'm paying myself a ridiculously low salary every month. And that basically still doesn't make me eligible for personal income tax because I'm below the first threshold, meaning it is about 17,500 euros per year at the moment. They are gradually increasing that free threshold every year. However, at the moment, it is just about that. And with these 350 euros that I'm basically claiming every month, I'm still not triggering personal income tax. And for you, it depends on what personal income tax bracket you are in right now. You will then basically also need to be careful that you're not entering the next income rate. And if you need assistance with that, you can reach out to us on Tax.One. However, now let's go to write-off number 2, and that is payment processors. Because everyone that is using payment processors also has to pay some fees for using the software. Me, myself, I'm using Stripe, and all the Stripe fees that I'm automatically paying to Stripe, the payment facilitator, I'm basically paying a certain percentage. It is something like 1 to 2 to 3%, depending on what payment option you're eventually using, how many extra features you're using from Stripe. And all of those fees that you are paying on every single transactions is basically a business expense. And especially for companies and businesses that generate high volume via payment processors like Stripe, for them it is quite interesting to actually use those expenses as a write-off because it is a business expense. You're paying Stripe in order to use their platform, right? However, Stripe doesn't really make it easy to find those tax invoices, and I basically wrote down how you can find them. And so here, this is how you can find the Stripe invoices, and I also made some screenshots. When you're in the dashboard of Stripe, you will then go here to the gear icon, click on compliance and documents, then you will see this window. You click on documents, and then here in the documents, you will basically find all of your tax invoices that are generated on a monthly basis. So that is interesting for e-commerce owners, for people that just use Stripe as me for certain digital products, whatever. Now, number 3 is the 1% entertainment expenses. And that basically means that 1% of every company's gross revenue in Cyprus specifically can be used for entertainment purposes. And what are entertainment purposes? It's basically a very broad term, but I personally use it mainly for restaurant visits, specifically business meetings. But here it is basically a gray zone, because what can be defined as a business meeting and what not is a very, very vague, thin line. And here I always say that any meeting can be a business meeting if you talk about business. So even if I'm going out with my girlfriend, but we talk about recording a new video next week, this could be seen as a business meeting as well, right? And the limit here on an annual basis for every company is 17,086 euros. And that is basically more than 1,000 euros every month for meals and drinks, which is quite good. The only thing you need to make sure is to collect the bills for all the meals and drinks. And then, even though it doesn't seem big, when I tell you that on every 100 euros that you're spending on a restaurant, you can save 12 euros and 50, that actually makes it more interesting, right? And that is why I always make sure to just have my business credit card with me anywhere I go. And when I suddenly decide to have a big dinner, for example, I was in Dubai recently and we talked to some mentors there. I spent 450 euros for that dinner. I used my business credit card for that because it was a business dinner. And talking about Dubai, that actually leads us to the next write-off, and that is super interesting for literally everyone, and that is business trips. Because in Cyprus, the accountants can claim a lot of expenses on your travels abroad as a travel expense. And I would actually argue this any kind of travel expense. For example, Uber. For example, even the plane tickets for you, your partner, your business partners, hospitality, hotels, Airbnb. All of that are expenses that I pay with my business, and then I claim it as a business expense. And when I was in Thailand for 2 months recently, I calculated just roughly 15,000 euros. And most of those expenses came from my business bank account because I was recording videos, I was meeting other entrepreneurs, I was talking about tax and offshore jurisdictions and this and that, whatever there is. And so the 15,000 euros basically reduced my profit for 2025 of my company by 15K, right? And that is more than 1,000 euros in actual tax savings that I have because I used my business bank account instead of my personal Revolut, whatever. And now it's getting interesting because all of those expenses that we just talked about are actually quite popular and a lot of people know about it. But where I see questions every single time are luxury expenses. Hey Rico, can I write off my personal jet? Hey Rico, can I buy a yacht and claim it as a business expense? And here it is quite tricky, but it is technically possible. And let me explain what I mean. For example, an accountant, any accountant in Cyprus, from what I know, is he can claim whatever he wants. Meaning, if you have a good relationship with your accountant, you can tell him, hey, Andonis, claim this as a business expense. However, by law, every accountant and every accounting firm is required to use an external auditor to audit the books. So even if your accountant claims everything as a business expense, at the end of the day, the auditor decides whether or not this or that invoice is actually a business expense. So for me personally, for example, a Rolex worked. I purchased a Rolex Datejust last year and we claimed it as a business expense because it was my first Rolex, because I could technically explain why it is a business expense and why I can create better videos, because I also made a content piece, multiple content pieces about purchasing that Rolex. And so it was possible to claim it as a business expense. However, we still have to wait for the auditor to actually confirm that. And then the next purchase that I made just a few days ago is a McLaren 570S, a supercar, an exotic car. And here there is no chance for me to claim this as a business expense. First of all, because I purchased it with my private tax money already, so I purchased it as Ricardo Gorski. And secondly, because in Cyprus specifically, only like certain SUVs and pickup trucks are business cars and you can only use them as a business expense. So for my exotic car, it is technically not possible. We didn't even try it to claim it as a business expense because it wouldn't go through anyway. But purchases like Rolex, for example, or other purchases are super individual. So this is where an individual consultation comes into play with your accountant, with our accountants, that we basically work with you hand in hand and we advise you on what you should purchase as a natural person and what you should purchase with your company entity. And anyway, I also wrote down that not even the price depreciation is possible to claim, because I know that this is possible in some other countries. And so yeah, there are quite some more write-offs, but those are the 5 most interesting, most important ones. I will talk about other write-offs in future videos. So if you're interested in these topics, definitely make sure to subscribe. And now we continue with the second tax hack, which is VAT. And let's just briefly explain what VAT is. So VAT is value added tax, and when you're operating in the European Union with a company entity, you're legally required to register for VAT in most cases. And the standard VAT rate in Cyprus is 19%. Every European member country has their own VAT rates. It ranges from 15% to 20-something% in Scandinavian countries. And basically, in general terms, it is super complex VAT. But in general terms, in the beginning, you claim your local VAT, meaning here in Cyprus with a Cyprus entity, I'm always charging 19% VAT. But when you then reach a certain threshold, it is about 10,000 euros in another country. So let's say I generate more than 10K in an annual tax calendar year in Germany, for example, I then have to register for OSS. But this is where it gets super complicated, because then you have to register yourself in different jurisdictions, and it is too much for this video. Again, if you're interested in the more complex stuff, definitely make sure to subscribe. I will do individual separate videos for those smaller topics. But now let's get back to the topic, which is basically paying less taxes legally. And here the number 1 point is obviously outside EU invoices. So when you are working with companies that are not in the European Union, let's say a US LLC or a UAE company, then in that case, you don't charge VAT. You basically issue a gross equals net invoice with 0% VAT, and that leaves you with quite some possibilities. But this is also something we advise in an individual consultation call because it is quite unique. Now let's continue with the actual topic, with the actual trick that I wanted to talk about, and that is within the European Union, even if you're cooperating with a German, Scandinavian, French company, then in that case there are a lot of special rules, exemptions and tricks. And I noted down quite a few that I will go to in a minute. First, let's talk about something that applies to B2B transactions, and that is that cross-border B2B transactions, where the client provides you with their VAT number, there is the so-called reverse charge mechanism. And the reverse charge mechanism also gives you the possibility to issue an invoice with 0% VAT, as you can see here. And here it is basically as follows. So instead of collecting the VAT in your jurisdiction, for us it's Cyprus, the client pays the VAT in their local jurisdiction. So for me, for example, I can give you an example. I work a lot with German entrepreneurs that have their own company. And whenever I issue an invoice to a German entrepreneur, business owner, I have 0% VAT. But it is very important to add to the invoice notes or somewhere on the invoice the VAT number of that client, and also mention reverse charge so that their accountant and your accountant and the tax authorities know what's up here. But guys, I did a big mistake in the past, and I will explain what I mean in a minute, and that is you always have to check the VAT validity. So there are quite some websites online, semi-governmental, governmental, and also third-party websites where you can enter the VAT number of the client that provides you with their number, because reverse charge again only works with valid VAT numbers, because otherwise it's B2C. A B2B transaction is by definition only with 2 VAT registered entities, company entities in general. And you need to check for a VAT validity, because if the VAT number doesn't exist, or it is out of date or not registered anymore because the client deregistered his business, then you are liable for that VAT after a certain time where you are not even in contact with that client already maybe. And then the VAT expense is going to be deducted by the net price that you sold the product or service for. And that is exactly what happened to me 3 years ago. It was quite some time ago, where I sold a little side project of mine, an affiliate website, and that website was sold to a German entrepreneur for, I don't really know the price, 5 to 10K, something around that range. And I don't even know if I checked the VAT or not, but even if I would have checked it, what probably happened is that this person purchased the website, gave me his VAT number, I did the reverse charge, and there is no instant feedback that you get from any system or from your accountant. You basically just issue the invoice, the person transfers you the money, and you transfer the login details or the DNS and the domain, basically. That's what happened to me. And then in the next quarter or 2 quarters, when the VAT filings were done and the new phase began of the new VAT quarter, I got a message from my accountant that I'm owing some VAT to the authorities. And I was looking into that, and I found out it is more than 1,000 euros that I owe in VAT because of that transaction. And I sold the project for, let's say, 5,000 euros. And then I basically had to pay from that money that I received, even though it was the net price, the money, I had to pay it to the tax authorities. So here, super important to always check for the VAT validity, especially if you're a solopreneur, if you're running a small to medium sized business. Because if you're running an enterprise business, you probably have your in-house accountant and financial department anyway. And that leads us to the next point, which in my eyes is super important, even for people that have an in-house team, because there are so many reduced VAT rates, which just saves you so much money if you know how to use it and if it applies to your business. And that is, first of all, the 3% reduced VAT rule for digital books and newspapers and some other things. There is a list that you can find online. And that basically obviously applies to ebook sales. And Tax.One sells ebooks, how to move to Cyprus, how to move to the UAE. And even though they are cheap and they are not really a big significant contributor to our revenue, we still sell them as like almost kind of a freebie and just value for people that want to get some additional information in a textual written way. And to those people, we can charge 3% VAT. So we sell the ebooks for 10 euros. And if we were to charge 19% VAT, then it would be close to 2 euros that we would give to the tax authorities in Cyprus. But because it's 3%, it is 30%, which is quite nice. Next reduced VAT rate is 5% for first-time property purchases and also some other food-related and pharma-related things. But this is the most common use case for most people watching these videos. It is your first property that you buy in Cyprus, an off-plan property from a developer, an undeveloped property or a property under construction, is eligible for a reduced VAT rate still today up to 5%. But also there are quite some limits depending on the plot size and depending on the total value of the property. After a certain time, you have to add the remaining plot size or property price with 19%. Quite individual. Again, if you're interested in purchasing a property in Cyprus, we also advise on that. Make sure to reach out to us on Tax.One. And now, something that I took advantage of just last week actually is the 9% reduced VAT rate for restaurant and catering services. And even though I don't have a restaurant license, I took advantage of that because I was hosting a little mastermind dinner. It wasn't even little, it was 45 people. And I sold the ticket price for this mastermind dinner for 100 euros. And I had a special deal with the restaurant where I rented the restaurant and we were selling mainly a meze Greek buffet with water and some drinks. And here, first of all, I issued invoices of 100 euros and that was including 19% VAT. But then I was digging a little bit into it and our accountant, our head accountant of Tax.One mentioned, hey Rico, you can charge 9% VAT here. And this was just for fun. I didn't even think about it. But then I was just doing my accounting a few days ago and I manually changed all the 19% VAT on those mastermind dinner tickets to 9%. And the total revenue of that mastermind dinner for me was 4.5K. Obviously, I paid some money to the restaurant, but doesn't matter. And with the 4.5K and 19% VAT, it was something like 720 euros that I were to pay in VAT. Because of that, I'm going to pay now just something like 320 euros in VAT. So I'm saving a few hundred euros. And no one would tell me that other than our head accountant, because the government of Cyprus, the tax authorities, they would gladly take that money. They wouldn't come to me and tell me, hey Rico, there's actually a reduced VAT rate here. So those are things that when you know them, you can save so much more money. And those are just two things, write-offs and VAT, that I mentioned in this video. And there are so many more tips, tricks, loopholes where you can save so much money as a business owner, as an entrepreneur. And this is what this channel is all about. So if you found this video helpful and you're looking for more interesting hacks and tricks in the future, you're more than welcome to subscribe to the channel. And if you do so, I will see you in the next video.